And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today. I'm your sensei and host, Gary Michuta. And I got a great show in store for us today. We're going to have the guy who started the modern apologetics movement here in the United States, Karl Keating. It's going to be coming on board. You know, he's the founder of Catholic Answers San Diego, powerhouse for defending and explaining the faith. Just great resources and great legacy Karl has given us. He's going to be coming on, and we're going to continue our series on classic apologetic works. Now, you know, I love this kind of segment because if you're like me, you're surfing the web or something, trying to find something interesting to listen to, you get tired of the same old stuff. This is definitely off the beaten path, and Karl has been coming into the dojo monthly, and we're just picking out these classic apologetic works that were written, you know, not too long ago, in the 30s, even earlier, that are fantastic works, but they've been largely forgotten. And so since having an apologetics library, having a bunch of resources, good resources, to help explain, defend the faith is so important, Karl's been coming on. We've been picking out these classic works, blowing the dust off them, and hopefully getting you excited about them, because these are great things, great literature, and just very helpful resources. So if you want to change of pace, this is the show for you. We're going to be talking about, of all things, a dictionary. It's going to be Donald Attwater's Dictionary of the Popes. Now, when was the last time you listened to a program about a dictionary? Well, trust me, it's going to be a fascinating discussion with Karl. So he'll be coming up on the other side of the break. On this side of the break, as always, we have our exercises that we do to sharpen our critical thinking skills with our Finding the Fallacy segment. Today's Finding the Fallacy is the gambler's fallacy. And we also meet an early church father. And early church fathers, of course, very important witnesses to the Catholic faith, that it goes all the way back to the apostles. And so it's always good to know about the early church fathers. Many times, apologists, we quote the left and right, the church fathers, as evidence. But it's really important to also know the background of them. And so on the show, we've gone over some biggies, you know, like St. Augustine, St. Jerome, St. Ambrose. Names I think pretty much every Catholic who has done the least bit of study in the faith would recognize. But the cool part about this segment is sometimes we run across early church fathers that you probably never have heard of, and we don't know very much about them. But nevertheless, they are important witnesses. And I think today's early church father fits in that category. It's going to be Caius, or I guess you could say Caius, the Presbyter of Rome. Caius or Gaius, the Presbyter of Rome. So, cool stuff in store for us today. And as always, I want to start off on the right foot by welcoming all of you watching the live stream, Facebook, YouTube, all the other platforms. Hello, everybody. Give my little shout out, yoo-hoo. Hat tip to everyone. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country and also via podcast around the world. And by the way, you're saying podcast. Wow, you mean I can access this program through the internet? Yes, you can. And you could also do it through your cell phone. Just all you have to do is download the Virgin Most Powerful app, phone app, and you can access all our programs. And also you can get a lot of free goodies in there. Lots of really good spiritual material that's available free through the phone app. Or you can always visit our website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And there you can do apologetics in place. You can go to our show, scroll down, find Hands-On Apologetics or Jesus 911 or whatever, and bam, you got all the programs right there. You can share them. You can tell people about them. You can listen to them. I know a lot of you, because of where we are in during the time of the show, many of you might be on lunch. You have to go back to work. Maybe you're going to lunch and there's going to be interruptions and you're going to miss what Karl has to say about down in Attwater. You can, never fear. You could just go to Virgin Most Powerful Radio and listen to the whole show, or even listen on YouTube, because all the shows are archived up on YouTube. And by the way, while you're there, please do us all a favor. Smash the subscribe button, hit the like, ring the bell, do all that other stuff, because that helps with our missionary outreach. So please keep us in your prayers. Keep us in, support us financially if you can. And also tell your friends. Tell people about it. Spread the word. Subscribe. Make us more visible. We truly appreciate it. And you're doing apostolic work at the same time. Let's see. Anything I'm forgetting? If you have a question for Karl, you could give us a call toll-free at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. Or you can always email. And by the way, I have received some great emails from people. And I always respond. Maybe not timely, maybe not instantaneously, but I do respond. And I truly appreciate hearing from you. So if you have a question or you just want to share what's going on with you, shoot me an email through questions@handsonapologetics.com. That's questions@handsonapologetics.com. It's really important to use that email address because that is the most direct way you can get a hold of me. There are some other ways you could do it through other websites, like I have a GaryMachuda.com website. I also have handsonapologetics.com. That's my website. But that particular address, questions@handsonapologetics.com, that one comes straight to me. Otherwise, if you do the other less direct routes, sometimes I won't see it for weeks. So there'll be a delay. But, hey, we're all members of this dojo, and I want to be responsive. So please use that email address. Can't think of anything else. We should probably jump into the finding of fallacy, shall we? This one's a really interesting one, too. It's the gambler's fallacy. The gambler's fallacy, also known, and there's, as you notice with logical fallacies, there's a lot of AKAs, otherwise known as. It's otherwise known as the Monte Carlo fallacy, the fallacy of the maturity of chances, and some other ones as well. It's normally known as the gambler's fallacy. What is it? Well, it's the erroneous belief that if a particular event occurs more frequently than normal during the past, is less likely to happen in the future, or vice versa. When it has otherwise been established, now this is an important qualification, when it has been otherwise established that the probability of such events does not depend on what happens in the past. Such events having the quality of historical independence are referred to as statistically independent. The fallacy is commonly associated with gambling, where it is believed, for example, that the next dice roll is more than likely will be a 6 because it hasn't come up recently in prior rolls. Okay, so all of us, I think, have encountered the gambler's fallacy, right? Do you ever hear of the, someone will say, well, it's due, something is due to happen. Maybe your favorite sports team. Well, this actually could be tied historically, but let's stick with rolling the die, right? A 6-sided die. You might roll the die and not come up with the number 6 for 3 or 4, maybe a dozen rolls. Then you could say, well, it's due. 6 is due to come. And the fact of the matter is, since each roll is independent of each other, that's not true. It's not true at all. In fact, every single roll of the die has exactly 1 in 6 chance of rolling a 6, unless, of course, you have a die that's been tampered with. So that's essentially what the gambler's fallacy is. Now, do we encounter this in apologetics? That's a great question. I don't think so. I honestly can't think of an instance where I've encountered the gambler's fallacy in the realm of apologetics. Now, I could be wrong, so if any of you have encountered it, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear where the gambler's fallacy was used in terms of defending the faith or maybe canard against the faith. That would be really cool. So, yeah, send me an email if you can. Questions at handsonapologetics.com. That would be really neat. But as far as I can remember, it's not something used in apologetics. But we do put it out on the show because, after all, it's just another way in which we can sharpen our critical thinking skills. And that's good, no matter where we're using it. So that is our Finding the Fallacy for today, the gambler's fallacy. Now, why don't we jump to meet the early church father today? It is Caius or Gaius, the Presbyter of Rome, who flourished from AD 198 to 217. Little or nothing is known of Caius or Gaius, the Presbyter of the Roman Church, beyond that which is recorded in Eusebius. He lived during the pontificate of Pope Zephyrus, i.e. between 198 AD and 217 AD, and he authored a written disputation to Proclus, a Montanus. Certain of his other authentic works of Hippolytus, has been sometimes falsely attributed to Gaius or Caius. So I think I'm not going to have enough time to read the small fragment, but basically it's only a paragraph that we have from him in which he speaks about that he can point to the trophies of the apostles in Rome. That is the bodies of St. Peter and St. Paul. And that is our early church father today, Caius of Rome. Coming up next, we're going to be chatting with Karl Keating about a classic apologetic work, Attwater's Dictionary of the Popes. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned.
Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light to my path." According to St. John Paul II, being a Christian means saying yes to Jesus Christ. It consists in surrendering to the Word of God and relying on it, but also endeavoring to know better and better the profound meaning of this Word. May God grant that we always rely on His Word, read it often, and put it into practice.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy?
Or will it be a girl? We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president?
Or maybe a doctor. Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on Apologetics. And it's time for us to dive into yet another classic apologetic work. And today's selection is Donald Attwater's Dictionary of the Popes. And to help us do that, we have our good friend, Master Apologist Karl Keating with us. He's the founder and president of Catholic Answers. He's written extensively on apologetics in other genres. And, of course, he's has written several books that are, I think, themselves Catholic apologetic classics, such as Catholicism, Fundamentalism. And you can check out all the great stuff that he's done on his website, which is karlkeating.com, or just go to Amazon and type in Karl Keating and check out all his books. And Karl, welcome back to Hands on Apologetics.
Good. Thank you, Gary. It's always great to be with you.
Yes, and it's so how are things in sunny California?
They're sunny. I was out mountain biking yesterday, and tomorrow, God willing, I'm going to drive out to the desert and do a long hike through an area of rather peculiar geological formations of wind caves and arches and such things. So, life is good.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I love how you're able to answer that without looking out your window. Because here in Michigan, if someone says, how's the weather, you got to look outside because God knows what's going on outside.
Yeah, we never have quick changes here, which is in most ways a blessing, but sometimes it can be a little dull when you are in perpetual paradise.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. And talk about paradise. This is a cool book, and I think it's also a book probably many of the people listening aren't familiar with, and that's Donald Attwater's Dictionary of the Popes.
Yeah, let me say first a little bit about Donald Attwater himself. An interesting man. There's not a whole lot I know about his background. He was born in 1892 and died in 1977. His parents were Methodists when he was born, and when he was a boy, the family converted to the Anglican Church. And then Donald became a Catholic when he was 18. And he never went off to a university, so high school was most education he had. But he ended up apparently very well self-educated. He wrote about 15 books of his own. He edited another 4 or 5. And among those, aside are the very famous Butler's Lives of the Saints. Mm-hmm. Alban Butler, English clerk, first wrote them, and then they were revised by the Jesuit Herbert Thurston, who died in 1939. And then Attwater, who knew Thurston, modified that 4-volume set in 1956. So aside from the books he wrote and the ones he edited, Attwater was a translator. He translated at least 4 books from Russian and 6 from French, all Catholic books. Or most. One of them, for example, is Vladimir Soloviev, God, Man of the Church, very, very excellent work. Mm-hmm. And then, a number of others. So Attwater was, despite not having gone off to university, was obviously a very well-educated man. And that comes across in his 1-volume Dictionary of the Popes, which was published in 1939, just a few months after Pius XII became Pope. So it only goes up really through Pius XI. And that's fine for our sake, because it's easy for us to find what we need to know about popes of our own lifetimes.
That's true.
But this one goes from Peter, all the way to a lifetime ago, basically. And I found it extremely useful because, for several reasons, which we can get into.
Okay. Yeah, that's it's interesting. I'm familiar with his other books too. I have his Dictionary of the Popes. And I think people would be surprised that we'd pick a dictionary to be a apologetic classic. But, reading all the various dictionaries of the popes, I think Attwater does kind of stick out as a very good resource. I know there are some dictionaries that are incredibly skeptical and not very helpful at all. I'd like to hear why it sticks out for you.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that Attwater sort of learned under Thurston how to look at historical documents, the provenance, the reliability, and so on. When Thurston first took in hand revising Butler's Lives of the Saints, he had a lot of work to do. When he's finally done, he said there were probably not 6 sentences in a row of Butler left in any, in any one particular place. So much had to be revised. Wow. Because Butler, for all his virtues, was a fairly credulous editor. And Thurston, who was an excellent scholar, one of the top Jesuit scholars of all time, I think, was very particular about making sure that he could demonstrate everything, whatever the topic was he was writing about. And so Butler's Lives of the Saints is a book with a lot of footnotes to it, showing where all the information comes from and freely admitting when we don't know something about a particular saint, and often dismissing claims about saints' lives when there seems to be no source or something's obviously been made up, where Alban Butler himself would pretty much put down anything that was said, including stuff that would have been even impossible to believe in some cases, okay? Yeah. Well, Donald Attwater then, being acquainted with Thurston's methodology, sort of kept the same with his works, not just the Dictionary of the Popes, but his other ones such as a Catholic Encyclopedic Dictionary and just his other works. He's been very careful to make sure he can write only what can be demonstrated. Mm-hmm. Okay. But on the other hand, he's got a keen Catholic sensibility, knowing that some things you, as a historical scholar, can accept on authority of their longevity, even if you can't track down to the first date the origin of a particular account of something. Okay, mm-hmm. So you do have, as you just mentioned, Gary, nowadays a lot of skeptical historical writers who reject anything that they think either sounds unlikely, or such as anything miraculous, or that they don't put credence in historical matters that have been passed down sort of word of mouth, and then eventually word of mouth to paper. So Attwater, I think, has a good, sensible approach to all of this as he's looking at the popes, especially, of course, the earliest ones, for most of whom we have very little documentary information. For the popes since the last, say, 500 years, certainly, but even 1,000 years, we've got lots of documentation to work off of. There are still some who are obscure, but for the most part, there's a lot of paperwork and sort of quasi-historical writings about them, keeping in mind that history in our modern sense is, like biography, only a few hundred years old. That the earliest writings of history, whether the saints or the popes, what have you, not so much to tell biographical details, but to show examples of how to live our lives. And those kinds of things in the old days could be, shall we say, overworked up to the point of exaggeration sometimes as far as what these historical figures did. And so it's often hard to figure actuality from the pious emendations of copyists and writers of many centuries ago. But Attwater, I think, has done a very good job in that. And that's why I think his Dictionary of the Popes is a book that, even though it doesn't cover past 1939, is an excellent book to have on anybody's shelf.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the nice thing it does about it is when he does come up with a pope that there's very little information on, like Pope St. Linus, he gives what we know, at least the most solid information of what we know, and rather than just putting a sentence saying we know absolutely nothing about this person or, what have you, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, there are some posts, that's about all you can say. We have the name because his name appears in the papal list, and there's some ancient papal lists. the Liber Pontificalis, the Book of Popes, from the early centuries, lists, popes from Peter up to that time. But there are some confusions. For example, Cletus and Anacletus, were they the same man or two different men? So you've got Peter, Linus, Clement, Cletus, Anacletus, Clement, so on. And there's a confusion there because the word Anna, or the element Anna, means again, as in the Anabaptists believe you have to be baptized again. Mm-hmm. So was Anacletus a man who simply was another Cletus, and so it was called Anacletus as a kind of nickname, or was he the same guy? So you got some confusions like that in the early centuries, and you do have some popes, as I say, about whom we actually have no documentation other than the names being on the list and their approximate dates of their reigns. But Attwater, does give us what we can know and says, in cases we don't know much, maybe not, almost nothing. So I'm looking at a particular page now where he looks at the lives of 3 different popes in one page, okay? Where later on in the book, he'll devote 15 pages to a pope, okay? Right. But he gives what we know. So, for example, this is Saint Eutychian, who lived from 275, or reigned from 275 to 283, so about 8 years. And he says, nothing is known about Pope Eutychian. He's mentioned as a martyr in the Roman Martyrology on the day of his death, December 7th. But his martyrdom is extremely doubtful. That is, I think that means not just whether he was martyred, but the account of his martyrdom was doubtful. Okay. Pieces of his epitaph were found in the papal crypt in the cemetery of Saint Callistus. That's one of the catacombs outside of Rome. So here, basically, we have broken pieces of his epitaph. So let's say his tombstone were found in this catacomb, but that's about all we know. Okay, but Attwater says that. Okay, and that's a problem with some of the earliest popes, and including the life of the fellow who came next, was Saint Caius. So Attwater, is not worried about making sure that each of the popes he mentions has a roughly equal word count. He just gives us what we can know, and especially in the popes about whom we know a lot, he summarizes very well.
Very good. Yeah, we're chatting with Karl Keating about Donald Attwater's book, Dictionary of the Popes. Stay tuned, folks. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics.
We got Ernesto from Long Beach.
I just wanted to comment, and I just wanted to thank you guys. And I kind of wanted to encourage people that are listening, maybe that are not donating, because honestly, I got to be honest, I used to think you guys were a little
too over the top.
Yeah.
That's right.
If God gave us a lot, and I have the blessing of listening to all this. I just want to call all the people. I got 5 kids, and I don't make a lot of money, and I'm still donating to you guys.
God bless you, brother. You're amazing.
We have to do this. We have to do the extra. And it's not even the extra. People see it like it's extra. Kneeling for communion, saying your rosary, saying the Divine Mercy Chaplet. It is not extra. It's what the church tells us to do.
Amen. You're a good man, brother.
30 years old, 29 years old, 5 kids, and I thank you guys. But everybody else, man, get on fire. Fight for the truth, man. I know what I'm telling you guys.
I love it.
Out there.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Karl Keating about a classic apologetic work, Donald Attwater's Dictionary of the Popes. And right before the break, Karl, we were talking about how well he does. He gives the information that we do have about some popes we don't know much about, but he also summarizes things. And I know... for me, I know that you've studied complex issues like the Inquisition and Crusades. Sometimes there's just so much information. The hard part is trying to figure out what to pick and what to leave out.
That's right. Now, Attwater's book is about 300 pages. Mm-hmm. So cramming in so many popes, all but the last 7 or so, that's quite a feat because you've got to take a lot of information and refine it. I mentioned that he was a good scholar, even though he never had gone to university. He mentions in the beginning of his book, in the introduction, that he had great reliance on 2 great scholars who produced massive sets of books about the popes. One of them was Horace K. Mann, who wrote the Lives of the Pope in the early Middle Ages. 18 volumes just about the popes from roughly 500 to 1100. Okay. That's a lot of material to go through. Yeah. And then the other one was the German Ludwig von Pastor, who wrote the History of the Popes in 29 volumes. So imagine reading those 2 sets, nearly 40 volumes there, plus so many other works, and then reducing all that down to a single 300-page volume. That's quite a scholarly accomplishment on Attwater's part.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if I remember, Pastor's History of the Popes, that too was from like 1100s up to only a few centuries. For all those volumes, there's just so much information. I certainly take my hat off to him because that's the hard part, is trying to pick out and give a nice cogent explanation that fits all the sources that are available.
Yeah, and despite all that reducing that Attwater had to do, he ended up with a book that I found I was able to learn a lot from, even though I had studied quite a bit, I thought, about the popes, because he was able to bring up a lot of small points that I found either interesting or useful or both. I'll mention just one here, is that in his short description of the life of Pope Victor I, who reigned for about a decade and died in 199, Attwater said he was the first bishop of Rome to celebrate the Holy Mysteries in Latin instead of Greek. And I hadn't known that it had lasted that long, that the Mass was in Greek for the first 170 years or so, exclusively in Rome, at least. I would have thought that it would have gone to Latin earlier, but no. Yeah. Victor I was the last one the first one to celebrate in Latin, maybe the last one to celebrate in Greek. And this when I read this, it put in perspective something that often comes up when other people who attend the Latin Mass, as I do, sometimes will say, well, the Latin Mass is the Mass of all ages. Well, actually not quite, because it wasn't actually used for the first 2 centuries.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
So little things like that that I'm finding from Attwater's book helps me in discussions of various sorts.
Yes. Yeah. So Pope St. Victor was a liturgical innovator then.
Well,
oddly enough.
Yeah. No, well, it was. And also, of course, when he innovated, he switched from what in Rome, at least, was by that point an obscure language, Greek. Around the time of our Lord's life, of course, Greek was the commercial language of the Roman Empire. So people throughout the Mediterranean world spoke Greek for business purposes, at least, But apparently by a century and a half later, Greek had pretty much been confining itself to Greece in that area. And of course, the Roman Empire had expanded and becomes consolidated. So Latin had become the lingua franca of the whole area. And so what Victor actually did was to set aside the hieratic or traditional language of Greek for the vernacular, which was Latin. And then, of course, centuries later, Latin ceased to be the vernacular. Okay.
Right.
But anyway, I thought that was an interesting little point that I have found useful at times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just flipping through it, one thing I appreciate about it is that it really does come from an authentic Catholic perspective. Lots of times, scholars who are Catholic try to put their Catholicism aside, and which makes it less valuable for pious Catholics to read.
Sure, an agnostic or Protestant or Hindu can write a book about the lives of the popes, but honestly, they're going to be missing a lot of things because they won't have that sort of instinctual perception of what many things signify. I don't mean just, what a liturgical practice might signify, but I mean the whole essence of what the papacy itself is in the plan of salvation, because it has an important role there. That's not something that an outsider is going to be able to appreciate, except in a rather cold, arm's length way.
Yeah.
And of course, Attwater didn't have that disadvantage. So when we read him, we're reading somebody who recognized that each of these men was the leader of the church on earth, the earthly leader of the church that Christ founded. And each had his strengths and weaknesses. I mean, the best of the popes had limitations and faults. I mean, look at St. Peter, denied our Lord 3 times. Okay, the worst of the popes, at least most of them even, had positive points. I can't think of any of the kind of warrior popes like Julius VI or somebody, who actually went in battle leading an army. Even he didn't promulgate wrong doctrine. Okay, and the bad popes of the 10th century, and there are quite a few of them then, they too were not teaching falsely, even though they lived often, many of them, scurrilous lives. So Attwater is able to argue, even though he doesn't do this overtly, but sort of despite the way he reports, he's able to argue that the human failings of the popes, and a fair number of them, or just the limitations intellectually or otherwise of so many popes, doesn't actually speak against the institution of the papacy or the church.
Yes. Yeah, very good. And and I think from what I remember looking up in the some of the more scurrilous or scandalous popes, he does a nice balanced job at he doesn't hide anything, but he also doesn't aggrandize or over exaggerate their failings as well.
No, I mean there's not a prurient interest here in their bad points. He mentions them in passing in a way so you can understand what's being talked about without having to get into unnecessary details. But he's also able to show, as you read through the book, the grand panoply of the papacy, how this institution that should have fallen apart in the first couple centuries at least, somehow, with no purely human explanation, has been able to last for 2,000 years. Despite the occasional knave who's been a pope, despite the many popes who have not been especially bright or diligent or more than just normally holy, okay, in their daily life. Despite all these limitations, just by reading Atwater's book, you get a sense that there's got to be something special, something backing up the papacy as an institution, because you can't explain its longevity by just looking at the men who are part of it.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, in fact, starting with the very first pope, Peter. Actually, it's disputed whether we count the popes from, his successor or Peter himself. But most dictionaries, if you looked up Peter, they would say that it's reputed that he had some sort of leadership with the apostles and so on and so forth. Where Atwater, I think, gives a really nice treatment where he goes into, you are Peter. He goes into John 21, and he actually flushes out the scriptural backing for Peter's authority.
Yeah, for example, whenever the apostles are listed, Peter's always named first. Why? He wasn't the first one chosen. His brother Andrew was. Okay. So why is Peter named first all the time? Well, there's got to be some reason. That just speaking as I am as a writer and editor, you've got 4 Gospels who are mentioning the apostles. They all end up using, the 4 writers, the same methodology of listing the apostles with Peter first. That can't be accidental. Okay, and there's got to be significance there. And this is the kind of thing that Atwater brings out, in his fairly short treatment of Peter, and similarly throughout the book. He puts things together in a way that the reader easily can appreciate the role of each particular pope who's mentioned, and the man is set within the historical context, within the liturgical context, often within a theological context, because many of the popes had to deal with theological controversies, and you begin to sense, just as you're reading through their short lives, the wider history of the church. Mm-hmm. And that's another good thing about this book, because if you were just to sit down and read it straight through, not knowing much about the history of the Catholic Church, you would end up with a pretty good background about church history just by reading what you thought were simply going to be short biographical sketches.
Yes. Yeah, that's an excellent point too. And that's interesting because it's styled as a dictionary, of all things, not a history of the popes.
No, and even dictionaries are strange. I don't know why it wasn't called an encyclopedia, because that's normally what we would think this might be. Because in encyclopedias, we find short biographies. But anyway, maybe that was a British usage, but that's what it is.
That's right. We're chatting with Karl Keating and talking about Donald Atwater's Dictionary of the Popes. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics. Stay tuned.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the mornings. Mm-hmm. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics, and we are chatting with Karl Keating about a classic work. It is Donald Attwater's Dictionary of the Popes. And, Karl, I know for me, it's a great one-stop research tool in that, for example, if you're studying the heresy of Arianism, you want to find out which popes dealt with Arianism, and also, often heresies also have political components too, social components. And the nice thing about Attwater is you can look up a pope, and he will not only talk about the heresy, but he'll talk about other things that happened during the pontificate that could be connected with it.
Indeed, yeah. So it's a good way to introduce yourself to some of these controversies, but by following along, through the lives of the popes who were, battling them during these particular centuries. So, I agree with that completely. By the way, during the break, I looked at Amazon to see if Attwater's Dictionary of the Popes is available. It is as a used book. It's not been reprinted recently. And I noticed that there are 6 hardback and 3 paperback copies presently available at roughly $15 a piece, so not bad.
Yeah.
Although I'll point out that Amazon has a photo of the same edition that I have, and the photo's not good. It makes the book look green. It actually is very light tan. So the first 9 people who get to Amazon can get their own copies of this book.
There you go. Yeah, that's great. So it's still available out there, and it should be.
I hope some publisher who specializes in reprinting Catholic books will reprint this one, because it certainly is worthy to bring back to be shown to a wider audience.
Yeah.
By the way, I was mentioning earlier some of the small peculiarities that Attwater brings out that I would find delightful. Mm-hmm. One of them was about Pope John II, who died in 535. And did you know that he was the first pope to change his name when he became pope? His given name was Mercury, and I guess that he thought it would be unwise for the head of the Catholic Church to have the name of a Roman god.
Yes.
So he changed his name from Mercury to John. He was the second John. The previous John's actual name was John.
Interesting.
For the first 500 years, then, the popes all had their given names. And then after that, the tradition was for them to change their names.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm sure people wonder, how did we get this tradition of popes changing their names and, honoring predecessors? Well, apparently it was by this person named Mercury who became pope.
That's right.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you a weird question. Do you have a favorite pope of antiquity? A non-contemporary pope?
That's not a weird question, but the answer is actually no. I don't think I do. I think if I were to go back now and go through Attwater's first 100 pages, I might come up with 2 or 3 that, really resonate with me. But I have to say probably no. I mean, I'm setting aside Peter, of course, because, that's right. Too easy to say that. I would like to choose somebody fairly obscure, with whom I share some foibles. That's usually how I end up choosing my favorites. This is why among my favorite writer of all time might be Samuel Johnson, the great 18th century British writer. He wasn't Catholic, but he had a Catholic sensibility. But he had a lot of personal foibles, many of which I share. So I share none of his skills, but a lot of his weaknesses. So I think with the popes, if I were to look back to the early centuries, what about you? You brought up that question. Maybe you have one in mind that really resonates with you.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of research with nominalism, things like that, obscure, weird things. And I think it's Pope John the 22nd, is it? Who, of course, he had tons of foibles, but he came to his pontificate during a really tough time where there were two people in Germany that were rivals, Ludwig of Bavaria and Frederick. And basically they came in during the interregnum period. And so he basically said, you both have to abdicate and we'll elect a new leader. And anyway, it ends up that Ludwig becomes his bitter enemy. And there's this interesting battle that goes on intellectually and also with armed forces between the papacy and Ludwig, where he takes under his charge William of Ockham and other intellectuals to undermine the papacy. And what I find fascinating about this pope is that he did everything in his power to try to ward off this, this menace, but, to no avail. So there's lots of foibles and I just find it, very curious, very interesting, even though he's not a saint and he did probably a lot of things that were wrong. I'm kind of like you. I like the obscure ones that aren't clear cut whether they're good or bad. Perhaps maybe they make a misstep, but I find them to be fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting going back. You're talking about a pope now of sort of the late Middle Ages to almost early Renaissance.
Yeah,
and that era had a lot of popes who engaged in battles, whether military or with their own assistants and those around them, and emperors and kings and so on. There was a lot of a secular angle to them. I don't mean so much that they were secular in themselves, but that they had to deal in their capacity as earthly princes with a lot of politicking at the same time that they were the prince of the apostles, the successor to him. So yeah, and I think it was not too long before John the 22nd was Boniface VIII, and he was the Pope, dying in 1303, whom Dante puts in hell because of a bunch of stuff he did. And of course, we don't know if that's where Boniface is, but he's never been canonized.
Right.
But that whole era was one very interesting. There was only one pope in that whole era who was canonized, and that was Celestine V, who reigned for about 5 to 7 months in 1294, and he was the first pope, or I should say, the last pope to resign, the last pope before Benedict XVI. So that whole era is very interesting. Yeah. So it's, and a lot of the most interesting characters are guys that maybe you would not have wanted to have dinner with.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's also fun to try to put yourself in the shoes of the pontiff, because some pontiffs were in situations where things may have seemed utterly hopeless. I'm thinking of, and I could be wrong with the name, I think it's Blessed John V, who lost the papal states and basically was a prisoner of the Vatican. I might be wrong on the name. But, for so many centuries, the Vatican had this temporal power that was stripped from them. by Garibaldi, and suddenly the papacy is alone in the Vatican.
That was actually Pius IX.
That's it. Yes, I knew that was right.
And because basically popes were kings for many centuries by default, because civilization had collapsed and bishops throughout the world were becoming local princes to run things because nobody else was around to do it. And so you end up with the Papal States, which were sort of little countries right in the middle of the Italian peninsula. And they eventually were swallowed up when Italy became unified around 1860. And then just Rome was left and was finally taken in 1869 to 1870. So, and there was an attempt, of course, to maintain this temporal sovereignty of the Pope, sort of as a protection against him from neighboring kings, princes, and presidents. But there's a good argument that having lost the Papal States actually liberated the popes.
Yes.
Because they didn't have to worry anymore about normal politics and could focus on the spiritual. So, it's interesting how that works historically. In the very beginning, of course, for centuries, the popes had no property of any sort, even churches originally until after the year 313. And then later, still very little say over anything physical. And then we had a long stretch where they did. And then again, to a period of time where they're reduced geographically to a very small amount. Vatican City is the smallest country in the world, about 109 acres. And yet, you can argue that liberated them in certain ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I can just imagine the Pope, stripped of all this temporal power, looking up to God, saying, God, where are you? And then his predecessor is Pope Leo XIII, who comes out swinging and probably is more influential than any previous pontiff for a couple of pontificates.
Yeah, it's interesting how that happens. Like in our lives, something seems to go wrong for us. We lose something, or we think we lose something, and yet coming from it is a kind of liberation that lets us do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Karl, as always, the hour flies. Why don't you tell us where can we get a hold of some of your books and whether you have something in store to be published soon?
Nothing soon to be published. I'm working on some stuff, but I'm working rather slowly because of the wonderful, nice weather here. I'm outdoors a lot while I can.
That's nice.
I'm not at my desk as much. Yeah. But Amazon is the place I recommend people go because it's easy to find everything. Just look up under my name. I'm just looking at my history there online as my books are being received. At the moment, my most popular one is actually my Debating Catholicism, which is a collection of my public debates. So you might want to check that out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to doing it again.
All right. That's Karl Keating, ladies and gentlemen. And check him out on Amazon or go to karlkeating.com. Lots of great books. Karl is just, as you could tell, a treasury of knowledge. And, man, the hour has flown. It's already time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here, turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for tuning in. And coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you with the Terry and Jesse Show. Thank you so much for listening, and God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to do this thing we call Hands on Apologetics. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a great day.